Afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us at ExamSoft, Improving Learning Outcomes Through the Use of Categories. This afternoon, we have Daniel Moosepees with us. He will be our presenter and talking about how to use our featured tools of categories and help you to improve the learning outcomes at your school or your institution. Daniel?
Thank you very much, Christina. I appreciate the kickoff, and thanks for organizing the call. I wanted to stress to the participants, everybody on the call, if you would look at your little dialog box there on GoToMeeting. There's a portion there to chat. Highly recommend asking any questions you want during this presentation and providing feedback, questions, anything you can, because we're going to take questions at the end. So we'd love for some questions coming from you directly into the chat box. Would be wonderful. So let's go ahead and get started. I've got items and questions up on the screen, and the reason is because that's the building block that we all focus on, and I wanted to kind of level set about our daily lives, right? So we're all busy and focused on building items and questions, throughout our busy days, and those typically percolate up into exams and quizzes, and we know how much fun those are, and the students really focus on these, and then they all percolate up into a course, and depending on if you're integrated curriculum or not, this might be more or less applicable, but courses then propagate up into a program, and almost everybody on the call here is part of some program they're working on, and by the time you're talking program level things, curricular design, curricular tuning, the accreditation, specialty accreditation, etc. It's really hard to see the questions and items. You can barely see it. It's in the P there. You kind of lose track of those things, and then once you start going up to institutional mission, right? Once you're talking about regional accreditation type activities or institutional accreditation, you really lose track of your questions and items, and that is the number one thing that students are engaging with. If you add up all the questions students answer or engage with throughout their college life, it's probably the most amount of feedback and interactions that institutions have with their most prized constituency, their students. And that's where categories come in. So today we're going to talk about how categories link up both learning outcomes and making those come to life, as well as how categories help you implement an assessment program so it's functionally and operationally successful. So to start out with, this is Daniel's fun tree of accreditation, or a fun tree of learning outcomes. But so hopefully this works for you. So at the bottom, right, and you have fun with me here. At the bottom, you've got these categories and items down in the soil there. It's really getting the chemistry right. If you get categories and items linked up correctly, right, down in the roots, the foundation, and then you focus on making sure that those are delivered through a channel that you capture the data, right? So this means, are you delivering Scantron or a laptop or a computer lab? Doesn't matter how you're delivering it, but if your items are tagged with categories properly and you're delivering in a proper way, then you can get all kinds of awesome fruit coming off of this tree. And let's start with, say, retention remediation is one of them. And I'm going to go through these pretty quickly, but we have a school, and I think this is Tora, who moved retention rates up 6 percentage points just by providing feedback to students so they were engaged and they could see what was going on. It's a wonderful way to get students bought into the process and do early intervention. Again, using the same data that comes from categories in the form of learning outcomes, you can do awesome stuff that's, say curricular redesigns. We know a lot of people are getting pressure to do integrated curriculums, and they're starting to shift over. Well, if you do assessments properly with categories, you can actually have a data-driven learning outcomes kind of culture of curricula. Student feedback and engagement, and this is a great one. I actually have a story of I think it was Ohio State. They release category reports at the end of every exam, which is really learning outcomes. And what happened is the gentleman who releases it every time went on vacation for a week, so the students took an exam, they got their grades back, and when he came back from vacation, there was a line of students outside his door saying, hey, where are my learning outcomes reports? Where's my feedback so I know how I did on this exam? And that's the type of story, that's the type of engagement from students that we really get excited about. And it's all driven by using the same vernacular for learning outcomes and assessment. In addition, you can do accreditation compliance. So we have one quote from a client, I think, that said their peers were thrilled with the data they could actually provide. You can actually save a lot of time on accreditation and generating evidence. So a lot of clients will actually find that as a huge benefit down the road, as well as if it's a front and center issue for you. Professional exam performance. This is one that we have another client who moved their first-time COMLEX pass rates from low 70s to mid 90s. So that is just a wonderful statistic. I mean, most people can't generate a 20-point increase in pass rates, but it's certainly possible, again, just using feedback. And then one of the most important things is faculty success. Now, say what you want about where faculty, the demands on their time, but faculty definitely want to help kids learn, and if you use categories well, you can really help faculty in their daily lives be more efficient and manage their time. So I put this little ladder up here, right? So this is, picture somebody has to crawl up there and pick these fruit. Most of our clients, or I should say the average of our clients, use 2 categories per item on an exam, right? And that number is changing, and fortunately it's actually going up pretty quickly. That's the average. If you do that, you're going to be able to get some of these fruit. You'll be able to do some of these things. Once you start getting up into the 3, 4 categories per item, per exam, you will be able to, I guarantee it, you're going to be able to go up here and grab these fruit in a beautiful way. So that's kind of what we're talking about, is every item on every exam, come up with a strategy for tagging it, and you'll be able to do some awesome things for your institution and your kids. So let's take it down a notch and say, okay, we've got these different constituencies. We have these students. Let's start with them up in the top left, right? When you start talking about assessments, they have their own voodoo, right? They're talking everything from, this faculty member's hard, this one's easy, I like to sit in the back of the class. Really, they don't have a good vernacular to communicate with, right? They might say, I'm good at this class or bad at that class. Faculty, which I love, is up in the top right. I put them as cats because they're kind of fiercely independent people, which is great. But they also have their own way of looking at the world. They all went to their own schools, their own professionals' experiences. So they have their own way of talking about learning. And then the administrators down there, generally it's a smaller group, so the communication channels are more fluid between them. But they're really trying to get all the cats into the right boxes, or trying to color code the cats so that the students know how to interact. Well, think of categories. The first thing categories does is it allows everybody to use the same vernacular, the same words. So let's use students as a perfect example. One of them might say, hey, I'm great in pharmacology but poor in anatomy. The other student might say, hey, I'm just the flip. Why don't we get together and coordinate? Another is a faculty. Let's assume one faculty says, I need to generate some questions or some items for my respiratory quiz coming up. They might be able to go to another professor and say, can I borrow some of your respiratory items? Fantastic opportunity there. And obviously administrators can, already mostly talking the same language, it allows them to synchronize even further. But where the real value comes from is now everybody's using the same language. So students can talk to faculty. So when the students go in and for office hours, they now can have talking the same language. And we'll talk about some specific examples here in a second. So that's the advantage of categories. It really allows you to have this great way of communicating with each other. So with that kind of set, this is the fun part. And if you're going to pay attention to one slide, this is probably the money slide here to actually go through. So when you're looking at categories, there's learning outcomes type categories. And this is just how we think about it. This isn't based on any sort of heavy research, but we have 400 clients that are all using categories in different ways. And so we get to see how people use them and look at the best practices. And this is what happens. Learning outcomes typically have one bucket of learning outcomes, which we call internally driven learning outcomes. This is usually institutional mission. Quite often it's a course structure or a curricular structure, so you actually would have categories broken out by, what block of the curriculum is it in. Then you have externally driven learning outcomes. And this is one that we all love and appreciate, and that's like accrediting bodies, professional exams, so NCLEX, maybe it's USMLE, maybe it's ACOM, could be a bunch of different things. But the beautiful thing about external categories is you don't have to worry about everybody coming to consensus because somebody's done it for you. So what's great is on external category standards, you can just leverage external bodies and not have to get into the internal discussions of having to design something from scratch. The third bucket of learning outcomes that we see is kind of a cognitive level. So think Bloom's or affected domains or something else that really just shows everything from knowledge recall down to really understanding everything from evaluation, synthesis, creation down at the higher levels. So those are the three learning outcomes buckets that we see used. Now, if you use those by themselves in categories, that's great. What we find as a best practice is to pick a functional category or two to pair up with these. We like to think of these as this allows you to operationalize the program, right? This allows all the workflows. This allows the faculty to go through and everybody will be able to effectively link up and do the day-to-day tasks. It's not really involving any sort of pedagogy. It's really just about how do we make sure we're all communicating and doing the right things to get this test built. So a perfect example is most faculty don't put in their own items, right? That's just a reality that we see. And they'll have somebody do it for them, but when you put the items into the system, you still want to be able to track those items with who the creator was, so they'll often have a category section of the category tree for who's the faculty that was responsible for building this beautiful item, right? The other one, which again, if there's one nugget of information which might save you a lot of pain, is the workflow on there. What we recommend, particularly with people going to an integrated curriculum, is you might have an exam now that has people, faculty, 10, 15, 20 faculty contributing questions. That can be a really painful process, hundreds of emails, really hard. What you can do is actually have a section of the category tree set up to say the name of the exam. So you tell all your faculty member, go into your pool of items, and I want you to label Fall 2012 Respiratory. Put those on 10 items that you want on this next exam. You pick them. You have all the different faculty use that same category. Then when you essentially, let's assume you're building this exam essentially and say, again, an integrated curriculum, you do a quick search for Fall 2012 Respiratory, and there you have 100 items, 10 from 10 different faculty. You can look at it, make sure it's good, and quickly build an exam. Now you've saved everybody a bunch of pain and time and just inefficiency. So that's a great example of how to use operational categories to their fullest. So that's great. So you look at it and go, well, what is the best practice? A lot of stuff up there. I highly recommend picking 2 or 3 from the learning outcomes. What we see is most people pick a course or curriculum. The next most common one is a professional exam from an external. And then about 35% of our clients are using a Bloom's type taxonomy. So highly recommend, again, they might be using others, but those are the most common ones. Pick 2 or 3 from the learning side, and pick 1 from the functional side, and almost everybody uses a functional one. And one thing I wanted to advise everybody on this call is we're offering up to anybody on this call, right? We're opening this up at a free consulting service where just type in the chat box and say, hey, we'd like to schedule a quick call, 30 minutes, an hour call, to talk through this thing you just presented. How does that really apply in my world of pharma or vet or whatever area you're in? We're happy to sit down and talk through the best way to implement this. So along those lines, let's take a real example here, right? So I hear people say, that's great, I really just don't get how these category things really link to student learning. So let's put a story on this, right? We got Sam. We love Sam. Sam's a great guy. Everybody likes Sam, right? Sam gets a 90 on his first exam. That's great. He gets an 86 on his next one, ends up with an 83, then goes down to a 76. By the time first year's over, but Sam is really stressing out about year 2, and rightly so, right? He's on a trajectory that's not particularly productive, but he doesn't know why. He just knows he needs to study harder, and he's starting to think that maybe this isn't cut out for him. Let's assume you've gone through and put a Bloom's taxonomy on top of this, right, or some sort of cognitive structure. And the size of the circle here is an example of how many of the items were part of that category, right? So you would expect, a first-year course, there's going to be a lot of knowledge recall, right, because you're trying to stuff a bunch of facts into the kids' heads. A little bit less analysis and not much on the evaluation. Well, as you're going forward, you certainly would expect to see more of the exam start being higher-order stuff now that they're starting to talk about facts. Let's see how those facts all play together. By the second year, Sam is in a bad spot. Sam is probably not going to make it using this example, right? And why wait till year 2 to find that out? If you deploy categories correctly and use this sort of learning outcome or any other one you want, you can actually intervene with Sam much faster. And actually, there's a webinar, Ohio State is doing a lot of great work on this area that they have on our website, so feel free to go check out our new website, which should be pretty easy to search and find. They have this is actually a real-life example of where they went through and helped the student change up their study habits. So that's great. So that's Sam's world. Now let's take a step back, right? Now you're a department chair, you're an assistant dean, you're the dean, you're somewhere in there, you're trying to say, let's change up our curriculum. We're going to an integrated curriculum, whether because it's mandated or you just want to do it or who knows what. So across the top, you have all the courses. On the left side, you've got your learning outcomes. Well, what you see here is a nice little matrix. You can go through and just do a quick density map. Where are we assessing, right? You can go a lot deeper, but just at a high level, what are we assessing? And maybe you come out and say, you know what, we're not doing a good job on applied biostat, right? So maybe we need to actually build more of it or assess more of it in these courses versus others. So this is a perfect example of how to actually, if you're going to start doing curricular tuning, really starting to refine your curriculum and make sure that your students are covered in all the right areas so that you're making sure they're ready for their lives in the real world. This is a great way of doing it, another good example. So now that we've done these theoretical examples, which actually aren't that theoretical, they actually are happening all the time, and you guys are doing it and living it, which thank you for doing it. Let's talk about practical tips. Right, so here's a few practical tips. We talked to a lot of people, and these are a good one, right? First, pull in key stakeholders early. Sounds like common sense, but we often see, hey, I'm going to do this as my project. Well, man, go out and reach out to the noisiest faculty member or members you have. Go get some thought leaders from different groups. Pull them into the process and make them, feel like they've got ownership. Let them pick a category. Let them debate a category structure or select between which ones you want to use. Pull them into the process. The faculty, train the faculty, retrain the faculty. And along those lines, make sure that when you're selling this to faculty, right, because faculty are busy, they got a lot of things to do, they don't want something new to do, sell it to them. Go to them and say, hey, you remember all that busy work we had to do last time we went through accreditation cycles? Guess what? If you tag your items one time this semester, you don't have to do that pain again because now we're going to generate evidence automatically from the assessments you built. Hey, you know what? Do you really want to engage with your students more? Are your office hours productive? Are you wasting half of your office hours just trying to understand where a student's struggling? Maybe now you can actually, the student will walk in with their own report saying, here's where I'm struggling. And you can now, instead of spending time doing discovery, you can spend time mapping out a solution for that student. Or maybe you didn't cover something well in class. You can do that. So sell it to the faculty. The other one is show off a report early. So we've got all kinds of cool reporting, which we're going to show you in a second. After your first exam, run a report and give it to some people. Not everybody is going to love it or appreciate it, but man, as soon as you can start showing value really quick. You don't have to wait semesters or years. Literally after your first exam, even if you just implemented last week, go through, tag some items, right? Tag the items on there, generate a report, and then just go show people what's capable. You'll get a ton of converts, and you'll have more evangelists helping you on your path. And then finally, I really want to stress this one, get buy-in from deans, provosts, whoever is your thought leaders on your campus is really kind of has the bully pulpit. Find out what's important to them. What we find is that, you know, the person we might be engaging with, they might be working on a curricular redesign, but the provost is really focused on pass rates, right? They might be focused on retention, or the provost might be all about a curricular redesign that he's personally taken on board or taken on. So find what's most important to them and make sure you say, hey, we're putting a category structure in place to feed data and make you successful and the organization successful in this area, so that they give you the air cover you need to do a change, you know, a change process, right? Because anytime change comes about in an organization, it's tough. So do that. And then here's the another good nugget for everybody on the phone. If you're stressing out, going, oh man, there's no way I'm going to get all these categories right, don't stress. The good news is categories are retroactive. So let's assume you implemented a curricular category, you implemented an accreditation category, and then 2 years later you want to implement Blooms. The good news is you just go tag your items with Blooms, and every report, the exam from last week, you could actually run a Blooms report on that. The exam from 2 years ago, you could actually do a whole curricular redesign and actually say, if I want to reuse my entire item bank for this new curricular design, you theoretically, you just go through your item bank and re-tag them with the new curriculum, and you can just look at it and go, how many items do we need to build in different areas? Where are holes based on this new curriculum? So categories are retroactive. They're awesome. So if you find yourself in that meeting for, you know, 16 hours and you're trying to nuance and name something just right on a learning outcome, hey, don't worry about it. This is good enough. We'll implement it, and if we want to tweak it later, we sure can. The system's designed to do that. All right, and like I said, we could help. So these are actually, you can't read them, that's fine. They're not intended to be read, but you can look at them and say, if you're a pharma school, if you're a podiatric, whatever you are, we probably have your category, recommended category structures built for you. Ask your account manager, you know, chat something in the box here, and we'll make sure you get a copy of them. In addition, Christina and the training team put together a really nice, you know, 6-step guide to building categories to reference this. And again, please reach out to us, and we're happy to spend 30 minutes with you on the phone and tailor what you're trying to do, whether you're just getting started or you're 4 years in and you're trying to go to that next level of sophistication. We would love to be a thought partner for you, and that's no cost to you. Just call us, and I'll personally jump on the phone with you because it's something that's near and dear to my heart. So, great. Daniel, that's fantastic. You've been doing a lot of talking. What about some specific examples from some of my peers? Well, here we go. We've got 2 examples. The first one's from Wegman School of Pharmacy, and this is directly out of Dr. Souza's presentation. And her presentation, by the way, it's a pharmacy school. It's on our website as well. So if you're a pharmacy school and you want to see something really specific about how she used it, or she's using it for curricular mapping as well as for their accreditation process, etc., it's a great webinar to watch. So on the right side there, that's actually a screenshot from our software. That's exactly how they have it set up. And you can tell that she went through and set it up with 1 external metric, which is really around the accreditation, 1 cognitive, Blooms, and then 3 internal categories. So every item gets tagged with one of those categories, right? And that makes a lot of sense for them, the way they operate. And she has a good story around the cumulative questions, and that's effectively a year 2 student should, every year 2 student should know this question. So I'm looking for this question to be 100% right for my year 2 students. Faculty came up and said, hey, can we actually have a few questions that aren't hard, but we really need to make sure they got this concept or else they're going to really suffer long term. Sure, so every exam they build, they pepper in these what they call cumulative questions, and they're like, you know, red, green lights around this student missed something, and then you go talk to those 3 or 4 students who missed a really obvious question, and you find out, did you go drinking last night, or did you really miss this fundamental concept? If so, we need to start talking now before this keeps growing as an issue. So absolutely wonderful job there. And then Ohio State has been one of our power users for a bunch of years, one of our first-time users, and they're doing great stuff. Eric Ermy there, Dr. Vandre are doing great stuff. They have, I think, 2 or 3 webinars recorded on our website. So again, these are just best practices stuff. Feel free to jump on and look at them. They went through and picked what we see as really, you know, best practice setup and the first block is a curricular block, an internal category. They've tagged authors because generally faculty don't put in their own questions. They've got a cognitive level, which this isn't Bloom's. This is something tailored to the medical field. And I think the right three are generally around NBME or USMLE type categories. So that's what those right ones are. And this works great for them. They're doing some awesome things with this. And just another thing that I asked Eric when we were chatting one day, I said, what category do your students really find valuable? And I was kind of shocked. He actually said the cognitive categories the students really like because it helps them with their study habits. And it kind of gives them an idea for, am I memorizing too much, or do I need to focus on abnormal systems and how the different systems link together? So I thought that was an interesting tidbit of information I thought I'd pass along. So there's a couple examples. Feel free, reach out to us later. We've got other ones. Again, we have a lot of clients, more every day, and we love hearing from you. Great. So now we understand why we're doing categories. We understand how they link to impacting students and why students get excited to see them. Now, how do you actually use the system to generate these things? So we're going to look at the reporting options for categories. So here we go. There's two main buckets, right? There's reporting options that are around the exam. So this exam just came out. Here's some reports around it. Then there's the longitudinal, which is across multiple exam, multiple courses over time, etc. So let's first start with the exam ones, and there's a smiling faculty member which I found online, which I love. He looks really happy. First, we'll start out with him, with this group here. And you can see on the bottom left, you've got a student mentoring report that has category flavors inside of it. You kind of have instructional feedback. How did I, if you want to really deep dive how a faculty member did in certain categories versus others, etc., you can do it there. But what we're really excited about is that right one called the summary report, which just came out, and it's really based on people on the phone. Actually, I know there's a couple of people on the call I see that contributed to this report, so thank you all. This is actually a super cool report. This is a one-stop shop for a faculty member or for your department head or for whoever's consuming it in an exam-level report. You can see at the top, you can see that, how did we do overall, high, low, average? What's the histogram, the distribution of the scores? You got at-risk students towards the bottom, and then question-by-question performance with some color coding about what to do about it if it's not working very well or if it's working great. But in the center here, this is where your learning outcomes are. So now imagine being a faculty member, and you can come in here and go, first of all, did I have the right mix of cognitive questions? Was it all factual knowledge recall, or was there enough vignettes, etc.? So you can come in here and look at that at a snapshot. You can also go in and say, hey, did all my students get this? Did I have a nice tight distribution of who understood this, or did I have a good chunk of the students really did poorly in this case, pharmacology, but I think they did okay on this one, pharmacology. So this is actually, I think, a real exam. We've anonymized it so you can't tell, obviously, but so this now gives the faculty something they can go reflect on and improve on over time. So absolutely cool report. Get a lot of people excited about it. Now let's look at the students, right? So these are reports that you will send or you can send directly to students. Now, I'll make a personal plea, please release category reports to students at some level. You get to choose which categories, how deep, how many, how few to release to students, but the data is overwhelming. The evidence is overwhelming that students will get engaged in the process. And sometimes you don't always want students engaged because they're kind of squeaky wheels, but the benefits outweigh the pain if you release category reports to students, and we're seeing a lot of our clients doing it now, which is awesome. So here's an example. This actually maps up with the faculty report. On this particular report, you now release this to a student, and in this case, assume they got an 81 out of a 79. They're like, great, I'm just about on average. But what's cool is now they can look in here and say, where did I do well versus not well, and they could get a green, yellow, red report. So now they can go, I'm actually an A student in this area, but I'm kind of a BCF student in this other area. So now I can actually do my own self-remediation. As I said, now they can walk in and go to the faculty's office and say, hey, I'm struggling in these areas. Do you have any suggested study habits or materials or experiences that I could do to make me more robust in this area? And I got to think, as a faculty member, that's a lot more productive conversation than, hey, I got an average score, can you help me? It's got to be a more productive conversation. So awesome report. It can be released straight to students, and we got a lot of clients doing it, so thank you all if you're doing this. That's wonderful. Now for the longitudinal. This is like the power report. It's kind of scary looking, but I encourage anybody on the call, when you click on that longitudinal button, you really can't break anything, right? You can't accidentally release stuff to students in here. At least I'm pretty sure you can't. It's really just a place to go get insights. Now again, this is a great report because you can actually drive down into a specific exam. You can drive down into a student. How did this student do over the last 6 exams, over the last 2 years? You can also look and say, how is my program doing? So for all my students across the last 2 years, what's my coverage of whatever it may be, ACPE standards, right, with your accreditation standards. So you can now look at this and do some really cool real-time data-driven decisions around your curriculum, around what you want to do or change, and drill down in a bunch of different ways. So I encourage you to go play with this. You really can't hurt anything. So that's the longitudinal side. So here you can see that there's actually, this particular reports is by student ID with cardiology, dermatology, immunology, oncology, etc. So you can now go through there and get an idea for curricular density. How much are we assessing in different areas is what this particular report's generating. So that's really it in a nutshell. I like keeping these things brief because I know people don't like hearing a lot of talking before they get a chance to interact. So that's it on categories. They really are the building block, which is why I personally wanted to do this presentation. They really are the building block for unlocking and linking up learning outcomes with assessments, all the way up to institutional, all the way down to the items themselves and helping faculty do their own sort of self-coaching. Thank you all for being part of this what I like to call the ExamSoft family, and I can't tell you how much we thank you all for your feedback, because everything you see on the screen is based on feedback from people like you telling us what you think will improve learning for kids. And that's why we get excited every day is about helping kids. So I think that's it on my side. So we might have a couple of questions, and if we do, I'll take a stab at those. So Christina, do we have a couple of questions that popped in?
Yes, we did, Daniel, and thank you so much for that Prezi presentation. I really love that tool. I like it so much better than PowerPoint. I really, I ran through a lot of the questions that we had, and I'm going to do my best to consolidate those questions. So if anyone feels that I am not representing their question appropriately, please be sure to retype it into the chat pane so that I can be sure to mention it again to Daniel. I want to make sure that everyone knows that we are providing a link to all the resources that Daniel referenced today in his presentation. So in our follow-up email to you, we will be sending out those links to you. So let's get started with some of these questions. Daniel, you mentioned that there are those that are getting the most value out of using our categories feature because they're assigning at least 2 categories per item. So we had a couple of questions about, like, what's the best way to get started or the best place to get started if they've already got items set up in our system.
So if they've already got items set up in the system, I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on this little slide right here. Hopefully you guys can see that. If you've got items set up in your system, and let's assume you don't have any categories in there, that's, again, perfectly fine. The good news is what I recommend to people when they're just getting started is think about an exam that's a week or 2 out. Go through and pick one external category and go through and ask, beg and plead a couple faculty members to go through and tag that upcoming exam with every item in there. Have them go through and add a category or 2 onto those items. Generate a report from that, and then show it off and start shopping around about how cool would it be if we can do this more broadly. Now, if you happen to have your curricular side is all set up and you're not going through flux, you could also bring that into the picture early on. what I find is that in order to bring on an internal category structure, institutional, programmatic, etc., a lot of people, that takes time to get buy-in from all the different stakeholders. So start that process up now and go ask everybody. Let them, come in and contribute, but don't hold up your categorization process. Start with an external one. Go pick a certification exam if you have that post, right? Or go pick an accreditation standard and just start tagging immediately with those so you can start showing off the power. Those would be the areas I'd start with. And then the other one, if you're drowning a little bit with, oh my God, we're operationalizing this thing and it's difficult and so-and-so is upset because they have to copy paste too much or whatever, feel free to talk to us. We might be able to help you with some functional categories to make your lives faster and easier so you can spend time on the learning outcomes. Does that answer the question?
Yes, it does. And I would like to add to that with another layer of the question. When you are setting up that structure, Daniel, how many layers deep would you recommend someone who is trying to, establish a new structure? One of the callers was asking about, I assume there's someone who already has a structure in place. They're asking, is best practices to set up at least 3 subcategories. So someone who's already got,
gotcha.
a strat. Yeah. So for a newbie who doesn't have a structure, and then of course someone who's continuing to build upon their structure.
Yeah. So if you, I think let me see. I think I've got one here. Let me pull up Ohio State's. I think is a good one to reference. I'm going to pull that one. You can see Ohio State's here specifically. I think they've got a little more detail visible. So if you look at this here, these right things here, you can see that this is actually to USMLE, the subject. This is like a subcategory for the subject area. If you went and interviewed them, I think you'd find that once it becomes too hard to roll data up, you've gone too far with the tree. So we find most people go two steps in, category A, then category, A plus, and then once you start getting into, category A plus plus, it might be too much trouble for the faculty members to really absorb and understand the data. So depending on how big it gets down there, think about it's doing this perfectly with great and granular visibility all the way down to the 3, 4 structures in. Might be really cool, but it's also overwhelming from a consumer of the data. So just try to balance those things, and I would recommend starting lighter rather than deeper would be my recommendation. So two branches in is probably good. If you go to 3, great, but I'd probably not have a whole bunch out there in 3.
And then to get the best out of the longitudinal reports, what kind of structure should they be looking at creating?
I think the longitudinal report, that's a tough question. I'd say it all depends on what you're trying to do. So you have some stakeholders who are saying, I use longitudinal reports to identify students that are starting to struggle and then do early intervention. That's really very much you're probably going to have a cognitive thing in there. You might have a curricular taxonomy in there to use. Versus you might have a group that's focused on curricular mapping and making sure that you've got maps done right across all students. That's really all curricular design, and maybe you throw an accreditation on top of it. So that's a tough one. That's a tough one to answer. It really depends on who is your power user is going to be, and if you pick again 2 or 3 learning outcomes, you can pretty much satisfy all the stakeholders if you do 2 or 3 learning outcomes well.
Okay, great. Thank you for that explanation for the longitudinal reports. There's a couple of questions that I'm going to combine together. It has to do whether or not we are going to be offering preloaded category structures, and if we have examples of best practices of category structures. I guess they're looking to see things that maybe they could look at to give them some ideas to jumpstart some of their own tree structures.
Absolutely. So again, I'm going to reiterate the offer of we are happy to jump on a call and actually consult with you individually, and totally fine if it's a very early conversation, you just want to brainstorm, but feel free to reach out to us and we'll kind of walk you through. Again, we have 400 clients who are really starting to understand vertical by vertical where the opportunities are. Here in the background, if you ask us, again, chat in the box and say, hey, I'd like a copy for my vertical or my area. We have examples for most everybody on the call. We should have one for your area. Jump in and ask us for us. We'll send you a copy of what we recommend for your area. And in addition to that, we're happy to have a conversation around the operational or functional categories as well. So we can definitely send you recommendations, and I think a conversation might save you a lot of pain. I can't stress, a conversation can save you a lot of pain so you don't set it up wrong.
Okay, we have just 2 more questions, so if there's anyone else that feels that I didn't bring about their question properly, please be sure to put their question into the chat pane. Okay, our last 2 questions have to go with the actual structure itself. One has to do with, can I review those categories prior to posting my exam? The question was posed, and I wanted to be able to review those categories to make sure I included what I wanted to include in an exam. So is there a way that I can see those before the exam is posted?
Yeah, and it depends how you're releasing the results. If this is releasing to faculty or is it releasing to students, there's different places to do it. But here's what we see happens. This is the reality, right? You deliver an exam, and quite frankly, there's some crappy questions on the exam. It's just inevitable, right? You put an exam together, some of the items are new, and there's some bad ones in there. So you go in there and you get rid of some, you throw them out, others you make into bonus questions, you adjust all those things, and then you got, okay, now the results are ready to go out. Then you get to go choose who's my audience, because you might release more categories to a faculty, a set of faculty members. Then you might release a smaller subset to students. You certainly can go through and either use a longitudinal report, or you can kind of preview yourself, and you can talk to your account manager the best way to do that, because again, it depends where you're at in the software. You can definitely go look at it before you blast it out to all the students or all the faculty members.
Okay, and then as far as administration or management of these category structures, typically who enters or maintains these category structures? Would it be a key administrator or the exam managers themselves?
What we see is the key champion coming in, the one taking ownership of the implementation, will usually say, hey, this part of the category tree is going to be controlled by some sort of central group, because these are the programmatic level ones. These categories should stay the same across all faculty, across all courses, or something along those lines. And then what they'll often do is they'll release the course level or faculty level portions of the tree and let the faculty go play in those areas, so the faculty then can start doing their own analysis on their own items or their own workflow stuff. So they'll kind of firewall off one portion of the category tree versus another. Now, we don't stop people from doing that, so faculty can go look at different things, I believe, but that's generally how they operationalize the learning outcomes. So, Christina,
okay, I do have one final clarification. Oh, I apologize,
sure,
Daniel. Go ahead. I have one final clarification question. Yes, a clarification question. For those exam managers that aren't actually creating the question items, it has to do with, item security, test security. They want to ensure that they're able to actually see the results of the exams. Let me repeat it specifically. Can all faculty see testing and score data from different courses without actually having to access the test items themselves? So they're very concerned about, testing security and the exam questions themselves.
That's a good nuanced question that I know we did some work on our security visibility recently. I can't say I'm a good person to answer that because I might answer it wrong. So I think that might be one we have to follow up with later, unless Christina, someone there wants to take a stab at it, but I don't know who's on the call right now.
Actually, Daniel, we do have account managers here on our end that would be happy to help answer that question live if you would like.
Sure, yeah, go for it.
Okay, great. Corbin is with us.
Yes, you can absolutely customize who gets to see what in the system. And if you have people that you don't want to see certain things and you absolutely want to show off other things, you can make that happen. And, of course, you can export this stuff and print it out and email it as well.
So, so the answer is yes, test security is there.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I think in closing, I just want to say thank you all for being part of this process of improving assessments for all the kids out there and helping them get more engaged, because that's ultimately what happens is if we get a good dynamic going between our faculty, our students, which we're all doing every day, and it's hard, we just are really grateful for what everybody on this call does every day to make the world a little better place. So thank you all so much, and I'd love to hear any feedback you have or additional questions. Thank you so much, Christina.
Okay, and thank you so much, everyone, for being with us this afternoon. Categories really is an important thing that we do to help glue value to what we're doing to help kids in their academic lives, so we truly appreciate the time that you've taken this afternoon to be with us. As you exit our webinar, we do have a survey that we would truly appreciate you taking just a couple of minutes to fill out. That is our feedback loop for us to let us know how we're doing and what we can do to help improve what we're doing for you. So thank you again for being with us this afternoon. Have a great day.